We're here to talk about content development. And a lot of us, we've been talking about lead nurturing and lead generation, and of course a lot of these things require content of some level. So that's what we're here to dig into. So I'm going to introduce here our main speaker, Eric Webb, who is the Senior Director of Communications and Brand at McGladrey, which he'll tell us a little bit more about his company in a second if you don't know them. If you're a golfer, you know them, of course. Zach Johnson, what's up?
Chris Marco.
And Eric's really in charge of the whole shebang when it comes to marketing, brand, and communication at McGladrey. Everything from advertising agencies, websites, content, you name it. So he's definitely been through this and knows the whole bit. I'm Pamela Markey. I've met quite a few of you already. I work at McLabs, and I look after the marketing for McLabs, and part of that marketing Sherpa. So I'm definitely in this role as well. I have, an amazing group that does content, but I've been here as well with a lot of the things that we all deal with content creation and the challenges.
So we take the credit and let other people do the
work. Exactly. Sorry, Dan. Anyhow, so I want to just kind of first talk about how important content was to McGladrey, and why don't you tell us a little bit more about your company?
So McGladrey is the largest accounting tax consulting firm targeting the mid-market at 50 million to 400 million target companies. We're the 5th largest accounting tax consulting firm in the world, about 7,000 employees. And you can imagine if you've been in any professional services business, very conservative, Midwest conservative. They've, over the past 10 years, been going on a buying spree and buying up a lot of smaller accounting firms across the East Coast and West Coast. We have about 80 offices, 70 countries.
Great. So you had a problem around developing thought leadership and content with your company.
So in 2009, we started to revamp our website and started thinking about what really draws audiences to us and what do people really want to know about us. And we realized that it's content. That's what we can offer people to give them a taste of our smarts as consultants and tax people. So the pie chart you see up on the screen right now kind of exemplifies what our senior management put forth. We spend a ton of money on golf and advertising, and you can see here that they wanted to put a big effort around content. The problem was they didn't want to give us the golf dollars and the advertising dollars. They basically had 2 writers, and in a large firm like this, needing support. So I had to figure out a way to streamline that effort.
Great, and you have faced some pretty key challenges here.
Right. So we had big problems that we really had no content strategy. We had a static website that didn't emphasize content. It really was a website about us, like many sites. Ad hoc production processes in which people could come in and they would request help, and then we'd send somebody to go help them. There was no really smooth process or understanding what resources were available to the company. So that was a big problem. We had nobody helping traffic requests, and that was an issue. And then, frankly, measurement. We had measurement, but no reporting. So we were able to tell people how well we worked or certain pieces when they got done, but nobody really saw the efforts or the results of their efforts. And of course, that didn't necessarily energize some of our subject matter experts to want to continue to help. So those were kind of the biggest.
Great. And how many people here have some similar challenges to these in developing content? Yes?
Yeah, it's a big issue for everybody.
Yeah, and I think, as marketing Sherpa type marketers, we all want to know, what does the research say? And we see the same things coming up over and over again about content, the same kind of things you guys are dealing with. So we say most effective for nurturing. So email newsletters, sales calls, white papers, thought leadership articles, webinars, blog posts. These, of course, are all pieces of content. So obviously, they're quite effective when it comes to that nurturing. This is from the Lead Generation Benchmark, the 2012 edition.
Right.
This one I really like. It's the inbound and outbound sort of charting difficulty versus effectiveness. On the bottom there's effectiveness, the top is difficulty, and content there is highlighted, which is clearly very effective, but also quite far on the difficulty line, which I'm sure we all can agree that content is not always easy. It's very difficult to write, and it's in some ways often a machine you have to constantly feed. So, and then this one is marketers' expected changes to channel budgets, which I really like too, because content marketing there is the 4th, and it's 62% of marketers that see an increase coming. Unfortunately, not all of us have increased budget for content in the way Eric didn't. He had to kind of make do with what he had. So, you know, really the message here is that, you know, content works, it's effective, we can use it for generation and nurturing in a really targeted way. But the reality is it's hard. What Eric is here to tell us is that it doesn't actually have to be hard. So he's going to start and tell us about sort of 3 key pillars he focused on.
Right, so we had to build a strategy around content. So content as strategy, not strategic content necessarily, which is what you hear a lot. And then the website, if the website is the focus of the universe for your content is the cement of that foundation. And then finally driving people to that web content. I've seen a lot of instances with a lot of smaller firms that I've worked with where they build some good content, but they don't ever really syndicate it out. So those were kind of 3 pillars that we concentrated on.
Great. So your strategy?
Our strategy first was to talk to the subject matter experts and say, this is what good content can do for you, right? It can help build your reputation, it can increase readership, it can drive visitors. And this is a good example of a single white paper that this particular subject matter expert did on risk and fraud. And it immediately got the attention of the press because we did it right. We built the content, we pushed it out, and CNBC, as well as about 3 other networks, picked him up and started to interview him on this particular event. So it was very timely and acted as a good result mechanism to energize some of the other subject matter experts to do some things.
And so, I mean, a lot of us have subject matter experts. Within, you know, Marketing Sherpa Mac Labs, we have the same thing, these great researchers and analysts that are working on these things. We all do. Can you imagine that Eric's subject matter experts, they're accounting professionals. So you can imagine getting them involved in writing and doing some of this content development is a challenge. So
the only problem is sometimes you get guys with big egos after they've been on TV, and then it's hard to chill them out a little bit. So.
Great.
The other strategy, of course, and most of us face this, is lead generation. You know, we have a long sales cycle, 18 months, sometimes 3 to 5 years based on an audit if you're in the certain industries. And we decided that if we could get ahead of it, start to use certain tools to try and pick when hot regulatory issues would come forth, that we could get ahead of the market and start to create content, also leverage things like Google AdWords, and be the first out in the market when people started to search for that content. And this is a good example of a very specific lingo-ish term that CFOs use, NOL carryback. Your typical consumer or other non-financial executive would not use that term. So we bought that up very specifically. We didn't have a Google AdWords campaign about us. It was about this great free NOL carryback tax content that you can get in a webinar. And it drove, at a cost of $500, drove 300 visitors to download the content and attend the webinar. So it was a great return on investment for us. And it continues to be there to this day, because we're the only ones who wrote about it.
Great. And now with content, we talk a lot about repackaging. So
yeah, I've heard a lot of the readers, rather speakers here, talk about repackaging. Really important to help layer on your expertise. If you think about building white papers and thought leadership, most people keep to the top of the funnel. If you think about white papers, we tend to think about content types. So we think about certain things like white papers, which are pure education at the top of the funnel, but then we also try to continue to build more content around that topic to build nurture cycles. And so this is a good example of one article in a newsletter going to a webinar, press release, and we also did an audio podcast around it. And then we also try and add a local flavor to it by getting our subject matter experts to push it out to their audience.
And the second pillar you talked about was the redesign the website, which we never want. I mean, redesigning website is a major deal, but this was important to you before you even started.
This is important, and we stole it away from our agency, who was charging us something like $200,000 a year to manage, and went to Joomla, which is open source, paid about $50,000 in consulting fees for Joomla, and redesigned the site. So as you can see right now, or before, it was all about us. And when you go to the new site, it emphasizes the content next, right? It's not about us, it's about our clients, our prospects, the information they're looking for. You can see even golf gets a small little sideline there. So we push that out. In the future, we're already thinking about the future and talking about what else can we do to even emphasize content more. So we're actually looking at redesigning our site one more time to look more like a publishing house. so it looks like a magazine.
Great. So those are some great pillars. How do we actually make this happen? So we want to get really tactical and talk about the production process that you actually applied.
So let me go through that process. We first had to think about our current stable of resources, right? We had 2 writers. We'd use contractors here and there. And we'd also have some designers or use contract designers, proofreaders, those kinds of things at times. And what we had is a system of people sitting on the bench, our writers or our production groups, and waiting for somebody to come to them and say, hey, I need help. I need support to write this or to build this content. And that person would go off, and they might be gone for weeks at a point. I was not really overly managing them. They were getting the work done. But I had no insight into when they would be done, when the next job could be ready, and those kinds of things. So it was really important to get more control of that process.
Great. So you took a 7-step, and there is 7 steps, but the idea is you can download the slides and hopefully apply maybe 2 or 3 of these, but there's 7 key steps that you had to walk through. So we'll start with the first one, implementing your project management.
The project management was the most important part. As I said, we had people kind of that I thought were very busy, or maybe they weren't so busy. And so we had to figure out what that process should be, and that everybody followed the same process so we could at least track how busy they really were. And this is just an example of our process. I'm sure you have your own processes, but you'll see in here where we have some indicators of the stars and the triangles, where there's a lot of back and forth in our environment because we have subject matter experts that have to check on what that writer is writing in that piece, right? Are they saying it the right way? And so back and forth and a lot of checks and balances, but we're trying to make it very fluid, and in some cases, steps can be skipped if it gets the right approval. So to speed along certain prioritized projects.
And if certain levels of content require more, or certain topics require more levels. So think about all the people that need to approve things in your group, or okay, that needs a step for design, or whatever it would be, multimedia, audiovisual. Track out first your project plan.
Right. We really broke down the steps of the process to make sure everybody would understand it, and we educated the whole company on that process. So everybody now was aware. And then the project form, really important. Most people hate forms, especially our creatives, But what we found is the form became really important because it level set everybody's understanding of what that project was, who needed to be involved, from the web team to the writer to designers, any group, right? Subject matter expert and their responsibilities. The other part of the form that was really important was that we use it as an educational tool. We had a lot of accountants who maybe have come to us for the first time. They didn't know what to expect. And so the form itself asked them certain questions and asked them to think about certain things. Does this content apply to other areas of our website or our business so we can cross-link? Should we build other content pieces around it, a podcast, a webinar, those kinds of things? Getting them to think a little more than just this one piece so we can try and move people through the funnel. The other thing it does is set those expectations, as I mentioned before. And you can see here very specifically, you are going to get 3 drafts. Any more than 3 drafts is going to slow down the process. So pay attention to this and don't run off and ignore us for a time being, because we're going to leave your project and keep going with somebody else's. And then we also set very specific dates and time, days that it would take to get certain projects done.
To avoid the dreaded fire drill.
That's right, yeah, because we were in that constant 48-hour, I need this done in 48 hours kind of fire drill.
Because we all have, who does not have fire drills here, I bet.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And again, download the slide, look at the sections here that he's really carved out. I think there's a lot of really smart things here in terms of priority and who's engaged. And I think that thinking through, I don't think that can be it's having your team think through, okay, what do I require? What are all the pieces? How can this benefit other people? That alone, instead of, especially because we get so quick and so busy and cranking things out, I think stopping and thinking about it is really key. So. Right,
it's hard to pull back that subject matter expert once they think they're done with it. It's, they hate to do it, but they know they need to do it. So once they're gone, I've done my job. Trying to get them back to do a webinar or a recording, it's like pulling teeth. So we got to get ahead of them.
Great. So then your project transparency is really important too.
Transparency, that's where the project management system, and we used different ones over a period of time. As we were more simple as an organization and building the process, we used some very simple tools like Microsoft Access, Excel, but we eventually morphed up into a more complex system. We currently use Basecamp, but there are tons of different systems out there, right? MS Project and those kind of things. Certain things I would emphasize, since you are working potentially with outside groups or internal audiences, you want them to have access. So maybe a cloud system is best. You want a system that'll help move the process along and keep it going. So I can see every project that's running, and I also see, you see little red marks up on the slides here in the top picture. Those are milestones that are falling behind. So I can go to that person and say, what's holding up this milestone, and help them push forward. The system also alerts people to their next milestone, that, hey, your milestone's coming up in 48 hours. So it's helpful to have systems that alert and move audiences around or forward.
Do you create templates for specific content types, so the project management steps are predetermined on the system?
You can in this particular system.
Just repeat that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. He asked if you can set up templates for particular project types, and you can. There are ways within the system to set up templates based on projects, and then you can always manipulate milestones. And we did do that. What we found is that, to talk a little bit about this, we didn't want to get so complex and detailed to track every minutia, because we tried to do that at first and it drove everybody nuts. It was too administrative. So we pulled back and dealt with bigger milestones, and that's what has lived. Yep.
And I think project management, is among the hardest things, especially when you deal with non-marketers.
Right.
And I think creating too complex of a process, or making people feel like, okay, it's more work to do the project management or do the work back than it is to actually do the work, people get really frustrated.
Oh, especially creatives. If you work with writers, they don't want administrative work. They're like salespeople. They don't want to have to type it.
Sorry, sales. And then you don't have to start. The other thing, too, is you don't need to go gangbusters right away. You can always start small. You said you started with Excel?
Excel, and then we did Access for a little bit, and then we, MS Project, we've used them all. So we ended up here just because of the amount of work that's flowing through the system now.
But it's something you can grow into. I think starting really huge is something that a lot of people make a mistake, that you must have the very complex project software before you can begin starting your project. So my favorite word is align, so I love this one. Align and embed your writers. This one's great.
Right. We found, even with limited writers and even contract writers or outsourced production groups, is we try to align them to certain market segments or industry groups within the company so that they start to show up at their regular meetings. And what that does is it helps that writer or the creative person become familiar with that group and start to advise them strategically on the front end. So if they start saying, hey, we need to build this giant newsletter, and they can say, well, maybe that's not the best solution for you. Maybe it's just a series of alerts or something like that, because if you commit to a newsletter, you're going to need to keep that thing going for a year, and I don't think you have the resources. And so they can help control some of the methodologies and systems and or choices that group makes. It's very valuable in doing so.
I think also the push versus the pull. So if you have your writers embedded in the groups and they're listening to meetings and hearing things on the same page, they can pull things out instead of always feeling like you're pushing your subject matter experts who, in your case, feel like they should be, billing hours. Really.
That's right. Yeah, there's no doubt that the writers have their own expertise, or the marketing leader has their own expertise, and they can lend that expertise to that subject matter expert to explain to them, this is the right way to build content, and these are the pieces we should build, rather than trying to hope that the accountant who's dealing with numbers is going to suddenly become a great writer and think about webinars and those kinds of things, because it's not their job, it's not their livelihood.
Great. And then aligning your projects and people to special efforts.
So just as we prioritize projects, we also try to prioritize the type of content or channel we use. So a podcast is fairly easy to develop, or an easy article, versus a big webinar or an event like this. So when we start to get project requests, we take a look at that industry group and advise them to whether that is the right choice for them, and maybe it's better if they just do a podcast every other week. And a good example is we have one retail expert in New York, and he wanted to do some big things. He wanted to do a white paper every month, and it was just too much. He had to do billables, he was the only guy, and he had to be the expert. So we told him, why don't we just do an interview we'll interview you over the phone, record it, edit it with free software, and it's up. So he has an audio podcast every other week, and he I don't know, he has something like 3,000 subscribers. So he loves it, and it takes him 40 minutes a month to do it. So.
And the people you're dealing with are very invested as partners as well.
That's right.
Because, I mean, we all have different stakeholders and customers to serve, but when it's people internally that, as marketing, they're your eternal clients, essentially.
That's right, exactly right. And so prioritizing content, not always jumping at the hardest thing. We try to help them figure out what is the best tool for them. Some people want to jump into blogs, and we ask them why, and we say, well, blog's not going to do that for you. Here's what you need to do. So we help manipulate and change those bad behaviors.
Yeah, and the latest, greatest thing, too, like social media, I'm sure, is one, too, because you have to wonder. And the worst thing is, of course, you jump into something and don't plan for maintenance long term, and then it dies, and you see these terrible pages 6-8 months later that haven't had a post in them for so long.
Yeah, when we first started to look at social media, we did a social media audit and found something like 36 abandoned YouTube sites that our people created. So we had to go, call our lawyers and force people, even people who had left the company, to take those down because we didn't have access. So.
What's the username?
Yeah,
idea.
exactly.
Oh gosh. Yeah, and I think also when it comes to different industries, especially your group, because you have many different industries you represent, so you could probably assign more time to things that are bigger allocation of your budget in terms of revenue. So if you have a little thing, maybe, okay, we'll assign the equivalent revenue.
That's right. Our niche industries never get the big resources because it's not going to pan out with an ROI. But we try to facilitate and help them with their content. And it could be templates, could be podcasts, could be simple articles, but it'll be quick things. It could be the use of a contractor who's less paid, but a good writer. And it's what they need. And they appreciate it. Because if we tried to do a big thing with them, it would fail.
Great. And then on the contractor note, your internal versus your external resources, you did something there.
Right. I try to figure out, do we really need a Cadillac writer for every project? Because everybody wants the Cadillac writer. I want a writer who has 20 years in the tax space and knows everything about tax. Well, then why do we need you if you're the subject matter expert? It's like, so I went out and found contractors that were journalists first, could ask good questions and could write. The subject matter expert is supposed to be the subject matter expert, so there's not a need for me to replicate that. And you can find those people. There's a lot of out-of-work journalists, right? The internet has put them out of business, so I can put them back to work and give them regular work. And we try to align them. Contractors like regular work, so I try to align contractors to kind of regular work, whether it's a monthly newsletter or a bi-monthly newsletter. They can get to know the team. It's a low cost for us, rather than have my higher internal writers or production group be involved in that effort, because they don't like the simple stuff. They want the big strategic, hard, dramatic work to work on, the white papers, the case studies, the multi-asset driven content engine. So it works out really well when we bifurcate the work that way.
And easier to ramp up people quickly on smaller, simple projects. Repeatable tasks, I imagine, are the easiest.
Yes, exactly. A good proofer can proof anything. I have one proofer outside I use.
And you had some really tactical cost-saving tips. So these are good things to note if you decide you want to try and get some people into it. A lot of us don't have the luxury of even 2 writers.
Right.
So how do we get a little bit of help?
And I've worked with some smaller accounting firms. We have almost like a franchise group, which are small accounting firms that buy our accounting software and those kinds of things. And I've worked with them and basically given them this tip: go to Craigslist, and be very specific what you want. I need a writer, good journalism skills, $30 an hour. This project will be 10 hours, no more. And you keep it at that, and you let the subject matter expert know. 3 drafts, 10 hours, no more than that, and that's it. And it works. You get good writers. There are good writers out there. You don't have to go to the Cadillac writer.
Great. And our final 7th point is archive content and, of course, results. It's always important.
Yeah, so the archiving content is really important. A lot of people tend to put content on their website and figure, well, that's my library of content. But the reality is when you start shifting around your CMS or you change your website, you're going to lose track and have broken links and lose that content. And so what we do is we have an Excel file. It's kind of hard to see here, but it's a simple Excel file. And each of those columns represents industries, keywords, the line of business that it was written for, and there's meta tag data, the author, the date, all those things. Our writers use this when they get an initial project and they go back and search against it, because then now they can build more content, right? They have more content on the same topic. If it's applicable and relevant and timely, that's how they're reusing content, so they can do more cross-linking on the website and in any kind of push out they do.
And reporting on your results, of course, you have to report our results.
Yeah, so we have to report the results, and you know, surprisingly in the past we did not. It wasn't until after 2010 that we really started reporting the results of what our content was doing. And what you see here is just the beginning when we made the transition to pushing out a lot of content, and the website doubled in traffic. We saw a dramatic increase. And then we also feed, each team member is given instructions on how to present the results to the subject matter expert and their team. And this is a good example of that. We get the web analytics, it's Google Analytics, Omniture Analytics, and they look for when they put up that white paper or whatever it was, and they look for the spikes, and the web team will help them find those things. And so we report that out. That energizes those subject matter experts. Hey, this is really working. And then we also tried to create a little kind of competition. We report out to the whole company the downloads of all the content. And so you'll hear them sometimes, well, we get the biggest downloads each month than anybody else, that kind of thing. So it really works well.
So the subject matter experts get a little bit competitive and
they get
actually
competitive.
want to do it.
Yep.
That's great. So again, the 7 key points, so you can get the slides and look into more detail, and of course Eric's around all the rest of today and tomorrow. But of course you want to know, well, what did this do for you? So talk us through your results.
Real quickly, so we had 100% increase in web visitors when we made that transition from 2009 forward. We had more newsletters. We were producing about 4 newsletters back in 2009. We're now over 12 newsletters with the same number of resources. I've not added more resources. The click-through rate from our email campaigns has held steady around 5, which has been good for us. But we've also implemented social syndication, and that's a whole other session. But it's getting 19% click-through rate for us, a very dramatic click-through rate for us. And we're also starting to do the conversion analysis as well. So, but from a production standpoint, a 300% production increase. So we were producing about 20 pieces of content per month. We now average 60 pieces of content, and we've hit as high as 120 pieces of content in a given month. And it does not, it stretches the system a little, but we're able at 60, we're still able to maintain that. So a 300% increase has been very dramatic for us. More importantly, it has made our subject matter experts get energized. They now see the value of the content because they see the results. And we have so many people filling out those forms now that there's a big production line. And they're banging on doors for more, which means I can now go to a CMO and say, hey, I need another writer, or I need another this or that, and it's having a great impact. And a good story, just recently, our consulting group had done a really good job of doing the whole conversion analysis. Just in the last month, they attribute $421,000 to the content being developed and the forms being filled and the sales being made for our technology consulting group. So it's been had a dramatic effect for us.
Very impressive. So it's all you need to do is these steps. Plus, Eric has a few bonus resources and tools to share, which again, you can download. Some key things. Yeah,
so forms, utilize them to educate and to make sure everybody's level set. Get a project tracker on there, any kind of project tracker to start with, really important. Use some type of content directory. If you're just letting your content float out there, you've lost a good bit of your effort. And then finally, tools and resources. If you're not using like Google Trends or Google Alerts, you should to catch what is hot and help your subject matter experts understand what is hot. We use Google Keywords to find the latest trends and work with those subject experts when they are not sure whether it's hot or not.
Great, and I don't think we have any time for questions, but...
No, we've got about a minute left.
Yeah,
so.
Eric's around, so any questions at all?
Yeah, any questions, by all means, just ask away. When I'm here, I'll be walking around.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.